But now you're having, some mines are reaching the end of their life.
Yeah.
The secondary sources are no longer there, and actually physical commercial stockpiles of uranium aren't going to be there either. So where do the extra pounds of uranium come from? And so you need to incentivize new mines to come into the market.
Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull Podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Jono Fisher is the CEO of Cauldron Energy, which is listed on the ASX under code CXU. Now, Cauldron Energy is an exploration company focused on uranium and other critical minerals in Western Australia. Jono discussed his experience and the history behind Cauldron Energy and the focus on uranium. He talked about the backdrop for uranium given the acceleration of nuclear energy across the globe and pointed to a triple-figure uranium spot price in the near term. He also talked about the political obstacles, particularly within Western Australia for uranium, and what it might take to change Australia's stance on it. He also touched on the projects at Cauldron Energy and what investors can expect. Here is Jono Fisher.
Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich, and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me in the studio today is Jono Fisher, the CEO of Cauldron Energy, which is listed on the ASX under code CXU. It's in the uranium sector, predominantly in Australian focus at the moment. We all know things change over time, but that's where the sole focus is. But welcome to the show, Jono.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here and look forward to telling you a bit more about Cauldron.
Yes. Again, uranium, it's a topic and especially a sector that is getting a lot of attention given, a lot of the global movements towards this green future. And of course, uranium and nuclear go hand in hand in that potential future. But before we dive into all that and the company itself, what is your history and how did you navigate your way to this position, especially in a small cap company?
Yeah, okay. Look, I'm a Perth boy, born and bred, but like many of us have worked around the world. I live in Sydney at the minute. My first foray into nuclear was in the UK. So I was in the nuclear team at Rothschild for many years, and actually in that team we were the world's leading nuclear industry advisors. Did every nuclear deal globally actually, and that was in a time when nuclear wasn't trendy.
Yeah, what time of year?
That was back in the early 2000s, early mid 2000s, and back then you're still doing deals, but the whole concept of nuclear and end of life considerations being waste, it wasn't seen as green.
Yeah.
Fast forward now, and nuclear's seen as green. There's been a massive shift globally, and so the nuclear renaissance is upon us. And after that, coming back to Australia, there wasn't much nuclear around. I got into the radioactive waste space, so I approved and financed and built Australia's Southern Hemisphere's actually first radioactive waste repository. Now that facility is built now, it is operating in Kalgoorlie, world's best practice, just outside Kalgoorlie, world's best practice facility, and it was approved approved by the WA government at a time when WA government banned uranium mining. So that's really interesting, right? Because it just proves that that even WA Labor is not anti-rad everything. They were prepared to build a world's best practice facility in WA, and it just shows, I think, that there's a great opportunity for other rad stuff in WA being uranium mining.
And then has that then segued you to your position now? I mean, what was the introduction or even the opportunity, the introduction to that? That's
right. I was in other small cap land in vanadium space actually, where I've got a bit of background too. And the opportunity came to do a recap of Cauldron. So Cauldron's been around a while, but there was an opportunity there to bring in a new team, some new funding, which we did through Canaccord. And they asked me to come on and knowing I had a bit of a background in the sector, which there is not, there's not a huge amount of rad experience in Australia. And it's been a journey since. We've been going about 11 months now since that sort of initial recap, and it's all going really well. And it really helps that the uranium price is going gangbusters. So there's some really good industry tailwinds.
The timing is everything, and that's what I highlight since I've started doing this show. Uranium it's been a lot of lithium.
You're the cause. Uranium price. There's a correlation.
I'd love to say I've spoken with some great people in the uranium space, and ever since I've touched certain subjects, they've gone ahead, and I guess that's why it's the market bull.
Really? And that's why I'm here.
Exactly. But I mean, describing what Cauldron Energy is, it's an exploration for predominantly uranium. But I mean, what is the company sort of looking to achieve, and I guess whereabouts is its focuses?
Yeah, so we did when I started, we did a review of the company's strategy and asset base. So our moniker is Exploring the Energy Transition, trademark. So that allows us to look more broadly than uranium, and we do have a nickel asset that we're actually drilling in the next few weeks. But the jewel in the crown at the moment for us is the Yanri uranium project in WA. Fantastic asset. When it is developed, it can be developed in a low capex, low opex way because it's an in situ recovery asset, similar to the Boss Energy asset in South Australia. Obviously, right now, the WA uranium policy and the ban on new uranium mines is a bit of a roadblock. But, we're able to progress the project in preparation for an eventual change in the policy, and it will happen. We're delivering a scoping study over the next few weeks, actually. Putting spot price anywhere close to spot price in that, and it's a low capex, low opex project. You can just smell that it's going to be some good numbers in there.
Yeah. Interesting. And that's probably a good discussion there about the actual setup, at least for Australia, but more so probably WA's, uranium legislation. So, I mean, knowing your, knowledge within that area, I mean, what is the current sort of setup or, limitations within that sector? And again, given the prevailing tailwinds that are coming, it's not necessarily just saying it's going to happen here, but we know that, especially nowadays, legislation can change almost very quickly, and some things are hurried through on Friday afternoons so that people don't pay attention. But where do you see that really evolving and going to over the coming 12 months?
Yeah,
almost?
So I think it's important for everyone listening to understand there's no new legislation change needed in WA. So Premier McGowan introduced a policy ban. This is literally a policy of the Labor Party to not approve anything. There's no legislation. And so, the policy can change. And if a new government comes in or a government minded to change a policy, it's literally the mining minister just needs to make a few notes on a page. So that means there's no readings in the lower house, and crucially, no need to negotiate with the crazies that inhabit the upper house to get consensus there. So that can happen very quickly. The government has shown in WA, as I think you sort of noted, that it can move pretty quickly when it realises something's wrong.
And there's an opportunity as well. Yeah.
For example, the recent heritage laws debacle in WA, which now that was legislative change that was needed, but they realised that change was needed when the almost entire community was up in arms, and they backtracked pretty quickly. Well, here, we don't need legislative change. And the current policy ban is really, really unpopular. I mean, WA is the best mining jurisdiction globally. There's recent polling. I sit on the Uranium Forum for the Minerals Council. We've put out some recent polling, and it shows, as you would actually expect, that the WA community wants uranium mining. That policy is incredibly unpopular. And what was interesting is we were able to break down that polling relative to current voting intentions. And obviously, Liberal voters you would expect would be against the policy and for uranium mining. But what our polling showed is actually even a majority of Labor voters want the policy change. And actually, what was it, almost 34% of Greens voters were pro-uranium mining too. I mean, that just shows, and also about 80% of One Nation voters, but it shows that, across the community,
you've definitely got the dominant vote.
People want uranium mining, and they want it because, not only can it make a difference to net zero for the rest of the world, you can earn export dollars for Western Australia, and crucially, you can create thousands of really high-paying jobs.
So then what are going to be potentially the factors that really accelerate this and potentially move the goalposts that we do? I mean, from WA's point of view, there's an opportunity there, especially with Cauldron, with the areas that they've got. Surely it's a matter of, well, if we don't do it, then we're missing an opportunity of a century, given that we're seeing how much lithium is now being taken and produced in WA, and this is potentially another golden opportunity, but we've got roadblocks. So what's going to be the factor that potentially derails that?
Well, we've got a state election coming up, obviously, in March 25, and so the clearest case for change is that change in government to the Liberals means a change in policy. We've had it straight from the horse's mouth. Previous Liberal governments have allowed uranium exploration and mining, so that's sort of the easiest.
Yes.
The second thing is to go, well, okay, Liberals are coming from a fair way behind in WA, although they're making up ground. But is it too much of a long shot to expect to change a government? What happens in a new Labor government from 2025 onwards? And that's a really interesting picture because you've got the mining minister won't be standing for re-election in next term, so there will be a changing of the guard there. And you've still got, I like to call it the left-wing ideology of the Labor, who are vehemently anti-nuclear and an anti-uranium. But the sensible centre of the Labor Party actually is relatively sensible and relatively pro-uranium, pro-nuclear. So it'll be interesting to see how, can the centre and the right of the Labor Party have more representation in Labor policy, and the factional politics around Labor not wanting to lose their left wing to the Greens. But then again, Greens are starting to come around to the nuclear game as well. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity there. The second thing is what happens federally affects the state. So mining is a state product, sure, but we're buying nuclear subs. That's a federal issue. They're going to be home ported in WA. There is a lot of talk around potential nuclear generation in the future energy mix for Australia, and it would be a very, very odd situation if we ended up going down our nuclear generation route in Australia in the national electricity market in the east, and you still weren't able to mine uranium. That'd just be perverse. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff that is opening up. The other thing that pundits are looking at is you're going to have triple-figure uranium prices in this cycle. That's a lot of dollars.
Yeah.
And that'd be a lot of dollars in the eyes of state coffers and royalties and jobs and everything else. And so, even just economic realism and pragmatism may well come in. Lithium prices, keep going south and iron ore prices are coming off. Well, geez, wouldn't another $1 billion export commodity be fantastic for the state? Yeah,
and we know that just periodically Australians, and especially WA, as you said, it's a mining town, it's a mining city. It just sort of, it's a no-brainer in many regards, but I always think that it's that political season as well where it becomes more of a game for them to start bringing things in at certain times around elections, or if it's, again, after it's all done and dusted, then they bring things through because everyone's just so fearful of, well, keeping their job or not losing it. Not saying anything gets them in trouble, because that's another thing that I see. It all becomes this political almost masquerade and this game show.
Yeah, and you kind of don't want that. And one worry that I would have is that, federally, for example, I think the nuclear, at least as a consideration for the future energy mix, is a good thing, removing the nuclear ban. Well, the only party talking about that is the Liberals at the moment. So this is immediately political. It shouldn't be. And you are running up against an issue of where it might be the case of right policy, wrong individual, because and this is almost getting to personal politics, but there's a lot of people that find that Mr. Dutton, they don't know him personally, but they just don't like him as a leader. Yeah. And there's that whole anyone but Dutton kind of mantra. Well, I'd hate for the good case of the pro-nuclear cause to be caught up in those politics, yet there's danger of it.
Yeah. Well, we'll move away from politics. We always get stuck in talking about that, and I save that for conversations with my dad anyway. But if we focus back on Cauldron Energy, and you said before, it's not just uranium, but it's the energies or the materials for the energy future. I've probably botched your trademark there. Yeah. But if you want to start with, just highlighting some of the projects that you've got, can you just elaborate on what you guys have in your project portfolio and what they're looking for and what the stages are of each?
Yeah. So our core asset right now is our Yanri uranium project. So that's been going for a while. And, it is about the 5th largest uranium project in WA, 5th most advanced. So in 2017, when Gowan banned uranium mining, he grandfathered in 4 projects. We were basically the 5th, so we missed out. Very unfortunate, share price cratered. Now of those 4 that were grandfathered, there was a condition put on them that they had to reach a substantial commencement within 5 years, and only the Deep Yellow asset or Vimi's asset has done that. So the other guys, including Toro, for example, were approved, but now kind of are subject to the same kind of whims of needing some policy change. And I think it's really interesting for Cauldron, where we're now essentially in that same boat as, for example, Toro, yet our value is still reflective of the last 5 years of horror that we've been through. And so I think there's a value disconnect there. And I'd implore investors to have a look at us. God, reach out to me, email me. Actually, my mobile phone number is on every bloody announcement. Call me. I'm very open to talk about it, but I think there's great opportunity there. So we have a POW approved. We're going to go out and drill Yandere more. So it's a big resource, but we're going to go drill it some more early next year. And we're also going to deliver a scoping study before Christmas this year. That scoping study will show, the opportunity for an ISR project. So that's similar to the Boss asset that's been delivered in South Australia.
Okay.
Now, I love to make this comparison, although Boss probably wish I don't. But technically, our asset is quite similar to Boss. So they're both paleochannel deposits. They're both about 100 metres deep. And they're both able to be developed through ISR, in situ recovery.
Yeah, I was going to say, just quickly, paleo deposit, what does that mean?
Old riverbed.
Gotcha. Cool.
Uranium flows through water. So they're quite similar, and actually Boss's initial feasibility study, or enhanced feasibility study they call it, was based on a mine life which is very similar to our resource. The difference is that Boss is able to deliver their project because they're in South Australia.
Yes.
And so they're capped at about over $20 per pound of uranium they've got in the ground. We're capped at 20 to 30 cents per pound.
Yeah.
So massive value arbitrage there when that policy in WA changes. And we don't, it's not going to be, going along and then massive upside the day that the election happens. It is as investors start to see that there is momentum towards a change, then you're going to get a greater probability weighted value. I did make a joke on one of my other podcasts that I did. Look at sports bet odds. Sportsbet keep tabs on the odds of a change of government. And when McGowan was in, 14 to 1. This government was not changing.
Yeah, he had like a 97 approval rate.
Literally the day he resigned, those odds went down to 9 to 1.
Oh.
Right? After those heritage laws debacle, it went into about 4 to 1. So they're still obviously
favourites,
but it is
off.
coming in.
Yeah.
Governments obviously often they say governments are voted out, not in. Well, I think the WA government's been kicking a lot of own goals recently to try and do their best to get kicked out. So, watch this space. We're very excited about, the uranium opportunity in WA, and my investor mantra is we are the cheapest JORC resource globally. And so, keep an eye out on that. The next asset we have is our Melrose asset, which is a nickel copper asset. We picked that up. It's in the West Yilgarn. We're chasing sort of Julimar-esque discovery, mineralisation. And what we like about our Melrose asset is someone else has done the initial hard yards for us. So that was Independence Group in about 2007. They drilled a crap load of holes, but they were looking for gold. We looked at their old results and they had some pretty interesting hits on nickel. In fact, some of those hits are better than some of the Julimar grades.
Oh, wow.
So what we've done is we inherited that drill data. That sort of geochemical stuff, it's only air core down to 50 metres, but we've plotted that. We've then overlaid the historical aeromag data, which showed a magnetic anomaly where some of this geochem anomaly was. And that's interesting.
Yeah.
And it was a moderate magnetic anomaly. You don't want super high magnetic anomaly because that's probably magnetite, don't want that. We were then able to do inversion modelling on that, and that converted the 2D aeromag data into three-dimensional.
Yep.
And what we were able to show there is that there is something below ground, and it's about 100 metres below ground. And our historic air core goes down to about 50. And so at 50, we're hitting some pretty interesting nickel anomalies, yet we're still not into the main guts of it. Mm-hmm. And nickel is not the most mobile of commodities. It's not like uranium, which does sort of flow. If nickel is, if there's something there, getting geochem straight above it is really interesting.
Okay.
And so our final step then, we did an EM survey with a chopper. We flew that a couple of months ago. Got the final data back quite recently, which again showed there are EM anomalies consistent with all that. So we're talking to drill contractors now. Want to be drilling before Christmas. We just did have to wait for the farmers to finish their cropping, which they've harvested. We're getting on ground soon there.
Are they these are the two projects that are priorities, or have you got other things as well that are happening on the books? So they're the two priorities. I mean, we did have some other assets. I sold a gold asset relatively recently, and there's a couple of other things in the portfolio we'll be getting rid of. But we're also looking for more, and the key things we're looking for is more uranium, most likely outside of Western Australia, frankly. Yeah. But on the lookout for that, and we've got a really good technical team and commercial team that allows us to look at a lot of those opportunities. So I'll just call out. You can probably tell I'm not a geo by background. Know enough, but I'm not a geo. So our chairman, Ian Mulholland, is one of the most respected geos in the Perth game. He's been around a long time. He's won Explorer of the Year twice. Oh wow! Okay.
For his discoveries, so that's quite uncommon, obviously, and so extremely well respected. And then our exploration manager, Angelo Socchio, he's a Brazilian chap, extremely passionate about rocks, and his most recent major discovery was actually in lithium, in one of his prior roles. But there's lots of work going on to find maybe one more project to fit with.
Yeah, to complete the package. Yeah. And that's a point there that you just alluded to, the opportunities probably outside of Australia, because that's the fear is that, depending on how WA goes with all this and you think it's a no-brainer, but until it's actually signed off and comes into law, it's hard to tell. But the rest of the world is still ploughing ahead in all different areas, and we've seen the uranium talk and conversations with some of the big players like Cameco is again starting to really sort of get some movement going, and a lot of the supply demand pictures for it are showing that this stuff needs to come online. So when you're looking at the outlook and almost opportunities, if we don't, others will take and seize that. Where are you looking as like the big opportunities or big players in that uranium space?
So I mean, uranium's really interesting because it's the most political, the most sensitive from an energy security perspective.
And that's just because of our history with Chernobyl or just some of these other things as well.
Given obviously civilian applications of nuclear and uranium came out of the military, right? So first of all, they worked out how they could do bad things, and then they worked out how you can actually
use it for good things. Yeah.
But the nuclear history has meant that the Soviet Union is a key, ex-Soviet Union is a key supplier in that industry. And now the West, especially with everything going on in Ukraine and Russia and the rise of China, energy independence and energy security and Western sources of supply is a real hot topic. And so you've got such a large market, part of the uranium market, over 45% is controlled through Kazakhstan. Now Kazakhstan is notionally, free of Russian rule, but Kazatomprom, the national company there, is under quite a bit of Russian influence. So, Kaz is kind of Western leaning, but with some Russian influence there. So that's a bit of a worry. Where else do you look? Well, certain parts of Africa aren't so Western friendly either. Sorry. And so, countries like Australia where we're, Western, rule of law, we should be low risk. We should be having exploration dollars and concentration into the country in uranium. And that's something that's starting to pick up. But, probably most of those dollars so far for Western friendly places have gone into Canada, into the Athabasca Basin. And that's something where we've chosen not to go because, the Athabasca is extremely rich returns.
Very difficult.
But it's very, 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 it's hard to drill and it's a high risk, high return exploration where, and there are plenty of ASX juniors with Athabasca, addresses these days.
Card, yeah.
And so we're looking to say, no reason for us to necessarily look there. I think there are other opportunities. Continental US is quite interesting, some in Africa. And even Europe is now opening up for uranium, and, Sweden's recently, changing its regulations there. So, yeah, there's plenty of opportunity, and it's something that has to happen because the supply gap, fundamental supply gap. The thing about uranium versus other commodities, you've got a pretty bloody good idea of what the forward demand is looking like, because the reactors are very reliable. They have very high availability factors, so you kind of know how much uranium you're going to need, and you've got quite long
longevity.
You've got longevity, and you've got kind of a long period from first mooting a reactor to getting it approved to building it. So you kind of know, you can see that forward demand. I guess where surprises have been recently is you've had, going back 5 years, you wouldn't have expected Japan to turn back on its fleet.
Yes. That was early.
You wouldn't have expected as aggressive life extensions to existing plants in Europe and the US starting to happen, Korea starting to happen. The new reactors are being built, and that's great, and more in planning, and that's going ahead. But also this sort of the life extension of the existing fleet really hits near-term uranium because they're reactors that
they're not going to take 10 years to build.
Yeah, they need more uranium tomorrow.
They need to be fed now.
And so that has an outsized impact on sort of near-term supply balance.
Interesting. Yeah, and I've seen the projections of what China is looking to do with their nuclear fleet, and it's similar with the US as well. They're all building them, and then you go, well, yeah, where are the ingredients to feed these beasts? And it almost, again, you sort of imagine uranium always being linked to nuclear, but it's got a lot of different other use cases as well. And that's where I think almost from a marketing point of view, it's got to be able to show that, it's not just utility for energy, which is great, but it's being used in a whole different bunch of other sort of utilities and resources. But I mean, where do you really see the uranium spot prices you alluded to going to triple figures? But where do you see that going? And more so, I mean, I hate to predict things because I think everyone can put up a graph and then put lines and say, oh, because of this and this, it's going to hit here at this point. And everyone's a genius in hindsight. And I think it's very hard. But where do you see that going because of this looming demand supply?
So I think there's a few interesting factors in what's changed in sort of recent past, because everyone says, well, we've had nearly 20 years of very poor uranium pricing. And fundamentally, why was that the case, and why is that different going forward? And so, one of the things, you had the megatons for megawatt hours program where, there was a disassembly of former Soviet nuclear weapons turned into uranium nuclear fuel assemblies. So that's a secondary source of supply, and that is diminishing rapidly. So, it is going to be 5 times less in the next few years. It's going to be 5 times less than what it was. So even in today's market, primary mining of uranium will only cover about 75% of demand. So the extra 25% has been filled with these secondary sources and physical stockpiles of use. So you can stockpile you for a long time. And, the history was there was probably overproduction of uranium back in the heyday because of the concerns about, need for nuclear weapons and, Armageddon situations. So you've had physical stockpiles and you've had secondary sources feeding today's market. But now you're having, some mines are reaching the end of their life.
Yeah.
So the secondary sources are no longer there, and actually physical commercial stockpiles of uranium aren't going to be there either. So where do the extra pounds of uranium come from? And so you need to incentivize new mines to come into the market. Yeah. It's not a case
and
of...
they're not easy either.
They're not. Yeah. I would say our Yanri asset actually, would be developed for quite a small amount of money. It's not... uranium is good in that it's not like, my previous industry in vanadium, a vanadium mine, man, the processing is hard and that takes a lot of money.
Yeah.
You want to get spare change, you had $1 billion. Uranium is not that. You can get uranium, especially ISR assets, 100 mil. Approvals can and social license that can take some time, but getting all that through against a backdrop of having probably 20 years of underinvestment in greenfields exploration. The amount spent on exploration in uranium has been plummeted
down,
because the uranium price was so terrible. So it's got a while to get back up to that. And so you go, okay, well, where does incentive pricing need to be to get even to a midpoint? Because there's obviously many different cases put forward by World Nuclear or the International Energy Agency. Where do you get to even get to mid case? And that's where pundits are saying, well, $80 to $85 of price, of achieved price, is where you're going to need to do to get your payback periods and everything to work, and your incentive pricing. Now that's received price to the mine under a long-term arrangement. Most uranium is sold under term arrangements, but it's spot that everyone seems to talk about.
Well, I'm glad that you
flies around a bit.
Yeah.
In the last 15 years, bar maybe for a month, term pricing has been higher than spot because there hasn't been an issue. What you're seeing as demand heats up, and also some suppliers who traditionally put their product into spot terming it out, means that spot becomes more volatile and people worry about not being able to get spot. And that means you can actually see some quite jumpy moves,
big spikes in volume,
spot because essentially the cost of the uranium to the reactor is very small, so a few percent. It's not like coal, and so the demand curve for what a utility pays for uranium is quite inelastic, because honestly it's not a big input into their cost of production or their operating costs. And secondly, if they don't have it and they have to shut a reactor down, that's really bad. And so it ends up, spot can move quite high. If they need the uranium, well, they'll get it and they'll pay for it. And then eventually what happens is there are these physical uranium trusts that hold physical uranium, and they'll sell and take a bit of that cream. Yeah. And then it has to get reinvested in new production.
Yeah. And do you think we're venturing towards a point where, we're seeing a lot of mergers and almost takeovers in some of the other commodities or areas, utilities? I'm not saying lithium's a commodity at all, but there's a lot of commotion in that because of these looming discrepancies in demand supply and locking it up and having interests. And it might just be that I'm not every day looking at what's happening in the uranium space, but have you sensed any sorts of, commotion within that, there are big players, and maybe it's not ones that we're familiar with, but those big multinational companies looking to get stakings into some of those, because that's when you go, well, the smart money's starting to make moves. Yeah. It's now just a matter of when it hits the mainstream, and then your punter with $1,000 cash probably buys at the top of that cycle.
There's obviously people looking at next gen and questioning, are they the next sort of obviously major target? And you've had smaller companies on ASX merging. I think what's interesting about a lot of the juniors is, you can have, and this is true of many commodities, is you can have juniors out there with a resource, that's fine, but can you actually, is it a resource that is capable of development? Will the economics stack up on that resource? Now, so we've got a problem with our WA project. Government policy will change. When it changes, is it economic? Abso-effing-lutely. There are others that you see, and you even, let's take the Athabasca, where you can see amazing grades, yet they're down 600 metres. And you go, okay, well, how is that grade, which is probably 1,000 times the grade that we have at Yanri, actually, where does that stack up in the curve of what's most attractive for the next production? And what you find is that actually assets, it's not grade that is the driving force necessarily. It's actually, what is your recovery method? And so for us, ours is an ISR asset. So if you're not moving dirt, if you physically don't have to mine it, you're going to be at the start of the queue.
Yeah.
And so, historically, in the last 20 years, almost all the new production that's come online has been soft rock ISR assets, mostly out of Kazakhstan. Those assets, when they come up, they will be the ones that get priority because, you don't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars building declines or God knows what. It's a fairly simple process, and I'd call out, what Boss are doing at their Honeymoon project. It's fantastic to see what they're achieving. First production soon, touch wood, and that's a great showcase for what the rest of Australia can do, what we can do, as soon as the WA policy changes.
Yeah, and their share price run. I know this because I've actually been an investor for a while in them, and it's been a great
Lucky
run.
you,
it's been a great run. But I mean, seeing them sort of captivate a lot of attention. I know Deep Yellow, another one, but they've got more Namibian focus, and they've got the WA project. But again, it's sort of
and what's interesting about Boss is so we would never say that we're a competitor to Boss. We learn from them because we're both ISR assets. But also, part of this anti-nuclear, anti-uranium brigade, and the boss of the AMWU in WA says this. He says, uranium's not good for mining. It's the next asbestos. And so to have
big call to make, isn't it?
Yeah. So have it to say, so to be able to showcase Boss and say, well,
it's not.
They're doing it pretty safely. Lots of happy workers earning lots of money, and the South Australian government pocketing all those royalties. I mean, I think it's just great to have success in the industry to show that we can do it safely.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that, in Australia with all the, really good workplace health and safety rules that we have in this country, to suggest we can't do that is kind of ridiculous. And the fact is, rad stuff is done every day in Australia. We've actually got, it is a small, but we have a very, very good and well-respected radioactive management and regulations in Australia. And all of this can be done under existing umbrellas of regimes. We've got ARPANSA as a national regulator. We've got ANSTO, which everyone knows is our national nuclear scientific and research organisation, and sort of does medical isotope stuff. And actually, we've got a separate organisation, which is ASNO, which is the anti-proliferation organisation. And all of those organisations are really well respected. And, yet maybe some regulations have to grow and a few new ones and everything else. But that capability is there. And we have a dangerous goods regime where rad stuff moves every day on the streets of Australia and doesn't really make too many headlines until Rio Tinto seems to lose a source. But
that was an example of when that did happen. I expected Armageddon, people burying their heads in the sand, booking flights, and for some reason it just disappeared. There was a bit of commotion, but then it just sort of it didn't upset too many people, at least from my sort of acknowledgement.
They found it.
Yes.
So that is a demonstration of how they found a needle in a haystack.
Yes.
Right. Tiny little thing the size of your thumb. Found it. So
good on them for that.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. B, no one got hurt. There was a storm in a teacup for a little while.
Yeah.
And if that's an example of how well that whole system works, I mean, fantastic. Fantastic.
But it was more so as well from a public perception. I was expecting, if that was done 10 years ago, there would have been an absolute uproar from everyone, and there would have been probably stampedes of people in the streets with signs of boycott Rio and all this sort of stuff because it was something to do with radiation and nuclear and all, and it just didn't seem to have that effect.
Yeah, and I think that's where where generationally, society has moved on. I hope we're all at the place where we don't want our Prime Minister, parading around Parliament with a lump of coal. I hope we're all there to say, even if you don't believe in climate change, you've got to agree that pumping shit out into the atmosphere ain't a good thing.
Not beneficial.
So hey, let's
find a good solution.
Even if you don't believe in climate change, still let's do something that's better, right? I think the younger generation's got a massive part to play for that. You haven't grown up being poisoned by Rainbow Warrior and Chernobyl and everything else. There is this fundamental change where people are open now in Australia to consider nuclear
as part of the energy
And
mix.
we're not saying it has to be built, but just saying why aren't we considering it? Remove the ban, let the market decide.
Yeah.
So I think that I speak obviously to a lot of pro-nuclear people and obviously a lot of anti-nuclear people reach out. One of the things that's really interesting is almost the first thing is, but no one wants it. Why are you doing this? This is a solution looking for a problem to solve. No one wants it.
Yeah, where are you getting this
and
from?
you're like, really? Well, yeah, 20, 30 years ago, I agree with you, but have you done polling recently?
And do you find with those people that when they do become a bit more aware of it, that they change their perceptions? Because I think there's a lot of people that find their hill to stand on, and we're in a way where it's like, it's actually good to be challenged, because then you go, oh, hey, like, it's okay to be wrong and
yes.
rethink. Or
Let's say there are different categories of that. But are there instances of people changing their minds? Absolutely. Look at the Greens in Europe. The Greens in Europe were historically very anti-nuclear. Now they are pro-nuclear. I wrote a piece that was published a few weeks ago where it compared actually Australia's Energy Minister, Mr. Chris Bowen, to the Canadian Energy Minister. And this is really interesting because the Canadian Energy Minister, his name is in French, I have trouble pronouncing it, but he's a rampant greenie, right? He has a history of environmental activism, has founded environmental not-for-profits and action groups, has literally been prosecuted for an environmental stunt where he climbed a building or done some weird. Like, he is a full-on
Your perfect representation of it.
He has lived experience in the industry, and he was vehemently anti-nuclear until about 6 months ago, where he's come out and said, actually, I'm man enough to listen to experts, world experts, the United Nations experts say you will not reach
your net goal
1.5 degrees, net zero. You will not reach it without nuclear. So he's come out and said, actually, now I understand all this, I am changing my view. And so Canada has now, pulled back some of their renewables targets. They're putting more nuclear into their future thinking. And the topic of my article was kind of like, well, what difference can a single person make? What if we had that person instead of Chris Bowen, who has no lived experience in climate activism, obviously is not an engineer, is not a power systems expert. How different could our future direction be? It's very interesting.
Well, and that's what I like to see is that, there are, again, it falls on a single or handful of people to really make that change, but it infects people in a way, and then all of a sudden the direction is set, and you look to the way the US is approaching a lot of their, in-housing a lot of their production of everything, and within 2 years they're probably going to be leading the charge and becoming an exporter again, as opposed to what they have. And it's just a fascinating adoption of how quickly it is, but there's got to be someone that actually does it.
So there's got to be champions for it, and there is a growing chorus out in Australia. Policy to support, and I don't mean, there are people that say, nuclear's only works with massive government subsidies. Well, it's interesting when you see that actually, like the offshore industry in the US and in the UK and in Europe is kind of in trouble now because it can't stand up on its own feet. There's massive subsidies that are being paid there. I mean, I think the nuclear industry was probably born out of the ultimate government support, which is the Manhattan Project, right? Like untold millions to develop a technology. But since then, there haven't been as many outright subsidies as you would think vis-a-vis the renewables industry. So, you've had the US, though, in the Inflation Reduction Act, now moving a lot of money into support and remove some of the roadblocks towards nuclear adoption, again, in the US. So you're seeing a bit of a renaissance there. And in more sort of autocratic, less, democratic countries, look at China. China is just steamrolling ahead.
Yeah.
Initially with borrowed Western or Russian technology, now with domestic technology. They don't seem too worried about cost overruns. They're just churning them out. And I mean, it's the same when it's the same kind of thing with a nuclear plant as with anything. If Australia is to purchase a new Navy frigate or a submarine, if you're only going to buy one of them, the cost per unit is going to be ridiculous. Buy 5 or 10, and actually, you're going to see your return on your investment. And that's where the likes of China and India and the US can obviously get outsized returns. And, for Australia, we've got 21 gigawatts roughly of coal that needs to come out. It would be a wonderful outcome to put in 10 new reactors, enough for economies of scale, have fantastic baseload power all day. And again, you know what? Have manufacturing onshore, having energy-intensive manufacturing onshore that we can't do.
And I can just see that for all the other materials that we're going to be utilising is that we're going to have to work on the refining process for a lot of them as well. Why do we continuously just go, we'll get it out and ship it off, because then we end up buying it back anyway? So it's like, why are we not sort of seeing that opportunity? And I look to Australia, maybe it's just because we just view ourselves as we're not big enough of a market to really warrant doing it, and it's just easier for a lot of people to do it elsewhere.
It's energy intensive. And Australia doesn't have cheap energy. Labour costs, well, with increasing automation and everything, labour's not necessarily the
biggest consideration.
The issue it is, but let's give Australia cheap, abundant baseload energy. See what we can do.
And if we go back now to the company, of course, Cauldron Energy, and that's the focus, because you've got a fair bit happening, and I can imagine over the next 12 months there's key things that investors should be aware about it and what's happening. And of course, you'll probably be doing more podcasts and presentations and getting the good word out there. But if you're encapsulating maybe like the 5 or maybe 3 key things that investors should take away, knowing that these are going to be actioned over the coming 6 to 12 months. I know these sorts of operations, it's a lot longer of a long-term plan, but what can you really give investors to take away?
I mean, the first thing I'd like to highlight to people is we've just done a capital raise. So we've raised some money to fund ourselves for our next exploration programs. And really pleasingly out of that, we've secured a major uranium sector investor. So they've got a strong track record of making a lot of money out of uranium investment. They are absolutely gung-ho the opportunity in WA uranium, and they're there for the long term, right? So
they've taken a seat at the table.
They've taken a seat at the table, and not only that, I mean, actually just announced literally like an hour ago, they just released a change in substantial shareholder notice. They bought another % on market. You've got to release after each percentage increase. So they bought another % on market only like 3 days since they released the last one.
Yeah.
So they're loving the opportunity and seeing the value in what we've got. So I'm really pleased to have a deep-pocketed investor who seems to be supportive of our strategy and our assets. So that's awesome, and that should really, I reckon that should give shareholders a real vote of comfort, because obviously in juniors, one of the things you worry about is liquidity.
Yes.
And hey, if liquidity dries up, where the God can afford anything, right? So I think I really encourage people just to have a look out there and see what's going on, because that's fantastic. The second thing you're going to see us do is drill, right? So that is drilling nickel at Melrose before Christmas, touch wood, subject to drilling contractors, and great time to be drilling, because quite apart to what was happening sort of a year or two ago.
They were impossible to get, and now
I
they're
am getting, people have rigs available.
Yeah.
They don't mind drilling around Christmas time. Yeah. No worries.
Open for work,
Open to work, flexible on rates, work for equity if we want, all sorts of stuff, right? So good time to be drilling. So we're going to be drilling nickel first, and then we've got a program of works approved to drill out the uranium more. Now, that uranium it's already a bloody big asset, and it's already big enough to support a mine's economic. But people are saying drill it out more. So it's low risk exploration. What we'll be looking to do is some resource extension, but also possibly some infill to bring up the percentage of indicated, so that supports our move towards PFS stage. And secondly, maybe hit a bit more grade. So, we're going to do that when it gets a little bit cooler.
Yes. We're going into the hottest periods of the year.
Maybe second quarter we'll look to drill up there. And then the other thing we're doing, and again, this happens to be before Christmas, is delivering that scoping study on Yanri, because that is, I'm really excited by that. Knowing, for example, Boss were able to make an FID on their project when the spot price was about $30. Right?
But no one was really paying attention.
And
there was a little commotion.
They used maybe in their new enhanced feasibility study, maybe they used a $60, $65 price. That was when the spot price was 30 to 50, and They used a higher price in the feasibility. Fine. Well, spot's already 73 to 75, with people calling it to go north, triple figures next year. I don't know what debt we're going to put in our. One of the problems. I don't know what debt we're going to put in there, and we'll obviously have a few cases, but any of those cases are going to be attractive. So I'm really excited to get that out. It is a small investment for the company because actually the company done 80% of the work, but when the policy changed a few years ago, they just didn't publish the damn thing. So
just been sitting there on the
sitting
archives.
there ready to go.
Yep.
Needed to be polished up and done. So we'll get that out of there. And I think the final bit is, what do we do on a new project? We're disciplined, so we're not just going to buy anything.
Just for the heck of it, yeah.
But there's uranium out there, and pretty much looking forward to getting some more of it.
No, exciting. And for listeners or viewers as well that want to follow and track the company, of course, it's listed on the ASX. But I mean, yourself and the company, where can they follow it and stay in contact? And you said your mobile's everywhere, so
it is.
Give you a buzz.
And look, I'm trying to be the most transparent, responsive, and out there sort of CEO of a junior. Historically, the company wasn't good at shareholder engagement. They even, in fact, lost their Twitter password. Kind of frustrating. I had to start a new
and
Twitter
then you can't
account
use
because
the same name.
Well, Twitter wouldn't. They said they couldn't. They said, we can't give you the password
verify it.
because we can't prove that you're the CEO.
Of course.
I'm like talking to a bot. It's AI's got a while to go. Anyway, so we do have a new Twitter account that's growing strongly. We're very active on LinkedIn.
Yes.
I am on a lot of webinars and conferences. But you know what? Just give me a buzz. I'm happy to talk to people and be mindful of not crossing them. Or sign up to the website. We've got a MailChimp list there. Usual suspects. There's active discussion on good old Hot Copper.
Hot
things.
Copper. Yes.
But maybe there's other platforms as well. But certainly it's worthwhile putting on people's watch screens because I think there's some really exciting milestones there that can drive some upsize returns.
Okay. Oh, fantastic. No, I appreciate you speaking because I know you're, as we said, your timeline, you're flying all across and speaking at a few different conferences and based in Sydney. So I appreciate you taking the time to sit with me in the studio today and talk about it. So yeah, cheers,
Been
Jono.
awesome fun. Thanks, Ben. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.